All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Scarlett, marketing manager. The word doesn't even feel like it belongs to me anymore. It's a title from a life that was happening to someone else, a character in a play I didn't know I was acting in. Right now, I am not a manager of anything. I am a raw, exposed nerve ending, trembling in the sterile, too bright light of our master bathroom. The shower is running. Daniel is in there, singing some off-key classic rock song, the steam seeping out from under the door. It's a mundane Tuesday evening. I'd just come in to grab my moisturizer, my mind already on the client report waiting on my laptop, on the lunch I needed to pack for our son, on the dry cleaning I had to remember to pick up tomorrow. The architecture of a shared life, built over 11 years. Brick by tedious, beautiful brick. Then, his phone on the vanity lit up. A text preview. From Jenna, from accounting. Can't stop thinking about last night. That thing you did with the world didn't slow down. It vaporized. The sound of the shower, the hum of the house, the very air in my lungs, it all just vanished, replaced by a silent, screaming void. My hand, moving on its own, reached for the phone. His password was our son's birthday. The betrayal of that simple fact curdled in my stomach. I didn't need to read more. The words were already branded onto the back of my eyes. But my fingers scrolled. Photo after photo. Her, him, a hotel room, his smile, the one I thought was reserved for lazy Sunday mornings, beaming at a woman I'd met at the Christmas party. She'd complimented my dress. A sound finally broke through the silence. A sharp, guttural gasp. It was mine. My knees gave way, and I caught myself on the cold marble countertop, my grip white-knuckled. The phone clattered from my hand. 11 years. The proposal on a snowy peak in Breckenridge. The positive pregnancy test we cried over in this very bathroom. The way he held my hand through 27 hours of labor. The tiny house we bought, painting every room ourselves. The mortgage payments, the parent-teacher conferences, the way he always made coffee for me first thing in the morning. It all flashed before me, not as a cherished memory, but as a lie. A beautifully constructed, agonizingly detailed lie. Every I love you, every kiss goodbye, every shared glance across a crowded room. Was it all just performance? The shower shut off. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. A woman with two wide eyes, pale skin, and a mouth slightly agape in horror. Who was she? The scar on my eyebrow from a childhood fall, the laugh lines I'd started to notice, were they even real? Or just part of the costume I wore for a man who fucked his colleague while I was planning his birthday dinner? The bathroom door opened with a puff of steam. Daniel emerged, a towel around his waist, his skin pink from the heat. He was still smiling, humming. He saw me, saw my face, saw his phone in my hand. His smile died. Scar? Punny? What's wrong? The concern in his voice was so practiced, so seamless, that for a split second, I doubted myself. Had I misread? Had I hallucinated it? Maybe it was a joke. A horrible, tasteless joke. My eyes, moving without my conscious instruction, dropped from his panicked face to the collar of the shirt he'd discarded on the laundry hamper. A crisp, white business shirt. And there it was, the final, undeniable brick in the wall of my new, terrible reality. A smudge. Small but viciously bright against the white cotton. A shade of red I would never wear. Fuchsia. Lipstick. I pointed a trembling finger at the stain. I couldn't form words. The scream was trapped in my throat, a living thing clawing to get out. His eyes followed my finger. The color drained from his face. The performance was over. Scarlett, he whispered, his voice cracking. It's not what you think. Let me explain. Explain. The word was so absurd, so pathetic, that the scream finally broke free. It wasn't loud. It was a low, wounded animal sound that ripped out of me, leaving me breathless. I backed away from him, from the truth of him standing there, still damp from a shower he'd taken after being with her. I backed out of the bathroom, down the hall, my hand over my mouth. I stumbled into the kitchen, leaning against the refrigerator, its hum the only solid thing in a world that had turned to liquid nightmare. I could hear him following, his footsteps hesitant, his voice pleading. Please, just talk to me. Jenna means nothing. It was a mistake. Mistake. A mistake is adding salt instead of sugar to a cake. This was an atomic bomb dropped on the center of our family. This was the deliberate, systematic demolition of everything I was. I turned to face him, and the pain was so immense it felt like peace. A cold, hollow calm settled over me. The trembling stopped. "Get out," I said. My voice was flat. "Dead. Scarlet. This is our house. Let's just get out," I repeated, each word an ice chip. "Now, or I will make a scene our son will never forget." He looked at me, truly looked at me, and I saw the moment he realized the woman he married was gone. In her place was someone he didn't know, someone with nothing left to lose. He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping in defeat, and retreated to dress. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the sounds of him moving through the house he'd just obliterated. I didn't cry, the tears were frozen somewhere deep inside. I was just a shell, standing in the ruins, staring at a future I no longer recognized, with a past that had become a sick joke. The game was over, and I had lost everything before I even knew I was playing. The sound of Daniel's car pulling out of the driveway was a low, fading growl that was swallowed by the Colorado night. I stood in the exact same spot in the kitchen, my hand still pressed against the cold stainless steel of the refrigerator door. The hum of the appliance was the only heartbeat left in the house. Silence. It was a different silence than before. Before, it was the comfortable, shared silence of a long marriage, punctuated by the distant sounds of our son's video games or the murmur of the television. This silence was absolute. It was a vacuum. It was the silence after an explosion, where the world is still settling from the concussion. My body was a statue, but my mind was a tornado. Fragments of the last 15 minutes spun wildly, the look on his face, the pathetic tremor in his voice as he tried to form excuses, the way he'd grabbed his keys and a duffel bag without meeting my eyes. "I'll go to a hotel. We'll talk tomorrow when you're calmer." Calmer, calmer. The word was a spark on a gas leak. I moved. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a tectonic shift. My calm, that cold, hollow peace, shattered into a million razor-sharp shards. I walked out of the kitchen, my steps unnervingly even, and went to the garage. I ignored the hiking gear piled in the corner, the tent we'd bought for a trip we never took, the new boots I'd been breaking in. I focused on the stack of empty cardboard boxes folded flat against the wall. Boxes from online orders, from his stupid protein powder, from my skincare subscriptions. I gathered an armful and carried them into the house. The cardboard was rough against my arms. I started in the walk-in closet. His side. I yanked open the drawers. Socks, boxers, t-shirts. I didn't fold. I scooped armfuls of fabric and dumped them into the first box. The casual intimacy of it all, the smell of his cedar sachets, the way his suits hung shoulder to shoulder with my dresses, felt like a physical assault. This wasn't a closet. It was a museum of our life, and every artifact was a forgery. I moved to the bathroom. His cologne, the one he'd started wearing recently, a new scent I'd naively thought was for me. I threw the bottle into a box. It clinked against the glass of his aftershave. His toothbrush. His fancy electric razor. The monogrammed towel set his mother had given us for Christmas. Into the box. I was an archaeologist of pain, excavating the layers of a dead civilization. The rain started. I heard it first as a soft patter on the skylight in the hallway, then as a steady drumbeat on the roof. It was a cold, late autumn rain, the kind that promised snow in the high country. Perfect. I dragged the first heavy box, sealed with reckless strips of packing tape, through the living room and out the front door. The cold air hit me like a slap, a welcome sensation. The rain immediately soaked through my thin sweater. I didn't care. I left the box on the front lawn, a sodden, pathetic monument, and went back inside for another. And another. I was a machine, fueled by a white-hot rage that had finally melted the ice in my veins. Each item was a memory, and I was expelling it from my body. The book on his nightstand. The running medals he was so proud of. The ugly novelty mug he used for coffee every Saturday morning. I didn't pause. I couldn't. If I paused, I would have to think. If I thought, I would have to feel. And if I started to feel, I would crumble into nothing on the polished hardwood floor. The lawn was a graveyard of cardboard. The rain fell harder, turning the boxes into dark, sagging shapes. Water seeped into the seams, staining the cardboard brown, ruining everything inside. A part of me, the part that was still Scarlet, the marketing manager, the organizer, the planner, knew this was insane. Impulsive. Petty, the other part, the new, raw part that had been born in the bathroom an hour ago, roared in triumph. This wasn't petty. This was primal. This was the only language left that felt true. A pair of headlights cut through the sheets of rain, slowing as they passed our house. Mrs. Gable from across the street, probably coming back from her book club. I saw the car stop. I saw the silhouette of her head turn. I stood there, in the middle of my front yard, drenched to the bone, my hair plastered to my face, surrounded by the waterlogged evidence of my shattered marriage. I didn't wave. I didn't move. I just stared back, a specter in the storm. The car quickly moved on. I looked down at the box at my feet. The top had collapsed, and I could see the sleeve of his favorite sweater, a cashmere blend I'd saved for months to buy him. It was soaked, the color darkened by the water. It looked small, worthless. The tremor started in my hands first, a fine, uncontrollable shaking. Then it moved up my arms, into my chest. The rage-fueled energy drained out of me all at once, leaving me empty and brittle. A sound escaped my lips, a half-sob, half-gasp that was torn away by the wind. I was just a woman standing in the rain, ruining her husband's things. The grand, cathartic gesture felt suddenly small and stupid. He was in a dry hotel room, probably ordering room service, maybe even texting her, and I was out here cold and alone, performing a play for an audience of no one. The tears came then. Not the elegant, quiet tears of a heartbroken heroine in a movie, but ugly, heaving sobs that doubled me over. They mixed with the rain on my face, hot and salt against the cold and wet. I cried for the loss, for the betrayal, for the future that had been stolen. I cried for the stupid, soaked sweater. I cried for my son, who was sleeping at a friend's house, blissfully unaware that his world had just been split in two. I sank to my knees on the wet grass, the cold seeping through my jeans. I wrapped my arms around myself and let the storm have me. There was no one to see, no one to perform for. This was the real grief. It wasn't powerful or cinematic. It was helpless. It was small. It was the realization that no amount of ruined possessions could change what he had done. The boxes were just boxes. The things were just things. The real damage was inside the house and inside me. And I had no idea how to box that up and leave it in the rain. The first thing I was aware of was the cold. A deep, bone-aching chill that had seeped into me from the wet grass and now clung to my skin like a second layer. The second was the light. A gray, sickly dawn filtering through the rain-streaked living room window. I was on the couch, wrapped in a throw blanket that was still damp in places. I must have stumbled inside, collapsed here. I had no memory of it. The third thing was the sound. A low, steady drip, drip, drip from my hair onto the leather cushion. And then the fourth thing, the one that jolted me fully awake, the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Daniel, he was back. He'd seen the boxes, the ruined evidence of his life, and he was coming in to, what? To yell? To apologize? To pack the rest of his things with methodical, cold efficiency? The storm of last night's rage was gone, leaving behind the wreckage and a paralyzing fear. I wasn't ready to see him. I wasn't ready for the next act of this nightmare. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, and crept to the window, pulling the curtain back just a fraction. It wasn't Daniel's car. It was Mrs. Flores from down the street, in her little blue hybrid, leaving for her early shift at the hospital. She didn't even glance toward my house. The world was just going on. People were going to work. The sun was attempting to rise. The universe was profoundly, insultingly indifferent to the fact that my life had ended on this lawn last night. I let the curtain fall back and turned to face the house. In the harsh light of morning, it looked like a crime scene. Muddy footprints tracked from the front door to the couch. A trail of discarded, soaked cardboard boxes lay just inside the doorway, where I'd apparently given up and left them. The closet door was still hanging open, his side a gaping, empty wound. The silence was no longer a vacuum, it was accusatory. It screamed of his absence. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I flinched. A part of me, the stupid, hopeful part that hadn't quite been killed, wondered if it was him. An apology. A plea. Something. It was a calendar notification. Noah, returned from Liam's 8:30 a.m. The breath left my lungs in a rush. Noah. My son. He was coming home in less than an hour. Panic. Pure and electric, shot through me, burning away the chill and the self-pity. I looked around the house again, seeing it through his 11-year-old eyes. The mud, the chaos, the palpable misery hanging in the air. I couldn't let him see this. I couldn't let him walk into this war zone. I moved. It was a different kind of frenzy than the night before. This wasn't fueled by rage. It was fueled by a desperate, primal need to protect my child. I was a mother first. Everything else, the betrayed wife, the humiliated woman, had to get in line. I grabbed the soggy, ruined boxes from inside the door and dragged them to the garage, heaving them into a corner to deal with later. I found every towel we owned and threw them on the muddy footprints, scrubbing at the floor on my hands and knees until the hardwood shone, though the ghosts of the stains remained. I ran through the house, gathering every visible piece of the devastation. A stray sock of Daniel's I'd missed, a book that had fallen from a box, the receipt for the hotel he'd texted the name of at 2 a.m., so you know I'm safe. In section. I shoved it all into a black trash bag and hurled it into the garage with the boxes. Out of sight. Not gone. Never gone, but out of sight. I jumped into a scalding shower, scrubbing the smell of rain and despair from my skin. I dressed in bright, normal clothes, jeans and a soft blue sweater. I tied my hair back. I applied moisturizer. I looked in the mirror and practiced a smile. It was a ghastly, cracked thing. I tried again. Better. The coffee maker gurgled, filling the house with a normal, morning smell. I scrambled eggs. I buttered toast. I arranged it all on plates with a terrifying sense of normalcy. The performance of my life. At 7:58 a.m., a car pulled into the driveway. This time, it was Liam's mom, Sarah. I saw Noah's bright, sleepy face in the passenger seat. He was laughing at something. I opened the front door before he could reach it, my practiced smile firmly in place. "Morning, sweetie." My voice came out too bright, too high. "Hey, Mom," he mumbled, trudging past me, dropping his backpack by the door. He headed straight for the plate of eggs. Sarah gave me a wave from the car. I waved back, the picture of a cheerful, put-together mother. She drove away, oblivious. Noah slid into his chair at the kitchen table. He took a bite of toast. "Where's Dad? Already at work?" The question, so casual, so innocent, felt like a physical blow to my sternum. I turned to the counter, pretending to need more coffee. "Yeah?" I said, my voice miraculously steady. "He had an early meeting." "Cool," Noah said, his mouth full. We stayed up so late playing Minecraft. Liam's mom ordered pizza. I stood with my back to him, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. I stared out the window at the backyard. The rain had stopped. The world was washed clean. But on my front lawn, though I dragged the boxes away, a single, waterlogged casualty remained. One of Daniel's running shoes, caked in mud, lay abandoned by the rose bushes. I had cleaned the inside. I had scrubbed the floors and hidden the evidence. I had put on a smile for my son. But the outside still told the truth. And sooner or later, Noah was going to look out the window and see it. The eggs on my plate turned to ash in my mouth. The performance was underway, but the curtain was already trembling. I was his mother. It was my job to shield him from the monsters. How was I supposed to explain that the monster this time lived here, wore his father's face, and had left a single, muddy shoe in the rosebed as a calling card? The day passed in a haze of manufactured normalcy. I drove Noah to school, discussing his Minecraft adventures with a lightness I didn't feel. I went to the grocery store, moving through the fluorescent aisles like an automaton, filling the cart with things I knew he liked. I even managed 2 hours of remote work, answering emails with a professionalism that felt like it belonged to another person. Every minute was a performance, every action a lie built on the crumbling foundation of what was. The text came at 3:17 p.m. "Daniel, I need to come by and talk. And get some things." The phone felt like a live wire in my hand. The casualness of "get some things," as if he were popping in for a forgotten file, not the salvaged remains of the life he'd chosen to blow up. The performance was over. The audience was coming backstage, and the set was a disaster. Me, Noah will be home at 4. Make it before or after. Daniel after. I'll come at 7 o'clock. I had 3 hours and 43 minutes to prepare for the end of my world. Round 2. I made Noah his after-school snack. I helped him with his homework. I listened to him talk about a new kid in class. The entire time, a clock was ticking down in my head, a bomb with my name on it. At 6:50 p.m., I sent Noah upstairs to take a shower. A long one, I said, my voice tight. Use my good shampoo. It was a flimsy barrier, but it was all I had. At 6:59 p.m., headlights swept across the living room wall. My heart wasn't a bird anymore. It was a stone, heavy and cold in my chest. I walked to the front door, my steps slow, deliberate. I didn't want to let him in. Letting him in felt like a violation. This was my space now, the space he'd polluted. I opened the door. He stood there on the porch, looking smaller than I remembered. He was still in his work clothes, a crisp button-down and slacks, but he looked rumpled, tired. He held a single, empty cardboard box. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. "Scarlett," he said, his voice low. I didn't say anything. I just stepped back, holding the door open. An invitation into the ruins. He walked in, his eyes immediately scanning the room, taking inventory of what was his, what was ours, what was now just mine. He stopped when he saw the mantelpiece. The photo of the 3 of us, taken last summer on a hike in Rocky Mountain National Park. We were sunburnt and smiling, his arm around me, Noah making a silly face in the front. It was still there. I hadn't had the strength to take it down. He looked away, guilt flashing across his face before he could hide it. I just need to get some clothes. For the week, he started, shifting the box in his hands. The week, I repeated. The words were flat. Dead. I've booked a suite at the extended stay off the highway. It's fine. We need to figure this out. Figure what out, Daniel? I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. I leaned against the wall, putting as much distance between us as the room allowed. Please, enlighten me. What exactly is there to figure out? The logistics of your divorce? The custody schedule for our son? The division of assets we spent 11 years building? Because the us's part seems pretty well figured. You figured it out with Jenna, from accounting. He flinched at her name. Good. It wasn't like that, he said, the plea back in his voice. It was the same tone he'd used last night. The same script. It was a mistake. A stupid, horrible mistake. It meant nothing, I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. It was a harsh, ugly sound. You keep saying that. As if that makes it better. You didn't trip and fall into her bed, Daniel. You made a series of conscious, deliberate choices. You lied to me. You looked me in the eye and you lied. For how long? He was silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. How long? The words were daggers. A few months, he mumbled. The air left the room. A few months. He'd been living this double life for seasons. He'd celebrated my birthday. He'd helped Noah build a science fair project. He'd made love to me, all while sharing a bed, a secret life, with her. Get your things, I whispered, the fight gone out of me, replaced by a weary, bottomless disgust. He nodded, a quick, jerky motion, and hurried past me toward the stairs, toward the bedroom, eager to escape my presence. I didn't follow him. I couldn't bear to watch him rifle through the closet, to see what he deemed important enough to take to his new, temporary life. I heard the shower still running upstairs. Noah, bless him, following instructions. The water was a shield, protecting him from the sounds of the dismantling of his family. Daniel came back down sooner than I expected. The box was only half full. A couple pairs of shoes, some jeans, a stack of sweaters. He'd taken the practical things. The things for right now. He paused in the living room, his eyes finding me again. I'm sorry, Scarlett. You have to believe that. I never wanted to hurt you. The apology was like a spark on dry tinder. The numbness evaporated. Don't, I said, my voice low and venomous. I pushed off the wall and took a step toward him. Don't you dare. You don't get to be sorry. Sorry is for spilling milk. Sorry is for forgetting to take out the trash. You annihilated us. You don't get to be sorry for the atomic bomb you chose to drop. You only get to be the asshole who dropped it." He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He had never seen me like this. I had never been like this. "I love you," he said, and it was the most pathetic, hollow thing he'd said yet. "No, you don't," I said, the truth of it crystal clear. "You love the idea of me. You love the life I managed for you. You love the convenience. But you don't love me. Because if you did, you couldn't have done this. You would have rather cut off your own arm than cause me this pain." The truth of it hung between us, stark and undeniable. Above us, the shower shut off. The sudden silence was deafening. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the ceiling, then back to me. The reality of Noah, of the conversation that would have to happen, was finally dawning on him. The weight of it settled on his shoulders, bowing them. I'll call him tomorrow," he said quietly. "We can tell him together." "No," I said, my voice final. "You will call him. You will explain to your son what you've done. You will answer every one of his questions. And you will do it alone. I will not be your shield. Not for this. You made this mess. You own it." I walked to the front door and opened it. The cold night air rushed in. "Get out." He hesitated for a second, then walked through the door, the half-empty box in his arms. He didn't look back. I closed the door behind him, engaging the deadbolt with a solid, final thunk. I stood there, my forehead pressed against the cool wood of the door, listening to the sound of his car starting and driving away. The talk was over. There was nothing left to say. He was gone, and the terrifying silence of the house was no longer accusatory. It was just the truth. This was it. This was the new reality. Me, the echoes of my son upstairs, and the hollowed-out shell of a life I no longer recognized. The days bled into one another, a monochrome smear of time. I functioned. I was a machine programmed for basic survival: wake Noah, make food, drive, work, sleep. The world had lost its color, its sound, its taste. Food was ash. Music was noise. The vibrant Colorado autumn outside my window was a grayscale painting. Daniel called Noah every night. I would hand the phone to my son and leave the room, standing in the kitchen with my hands braced on the sink, listening to the low murmur of Noah's voice. He asked few questions. He mostly just said okay and uh-huh. Afterward, he'd be quiet, retreating into his video games or a book with a new, unsettling intensity. The easy, open boy was slowly receding, and I had no idea how to pull him back. I could barely keep myself afloat. The legal papers arrived in a crisp, beige envelope. I left it unopened on the kitchen counter for 2 days, a monument to my denial. Finally, I slid it open. The language was cold, impersonal. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Parenting time. Division of marital assets. It reduced 11 years of love, trust, and shared dreams to a series of bullet points and subclauses. Daniel was being fair, reasonable. It made me hate him more. I wanted him to be a monster in the documents too. I wanted the papers to scream his betrayal. Instead, they were calm, neutral, and utterly devastating. One afternoon, a week after the talk, I found myself in the grocery store. I was moving my cart on autopilot through the produce section, a list in my hand I couldn't seem to read. My brain was full of static. Then I saw them, 2 aisles over. Daniel and her. Jenna from accounting was real. I am accounting was real. She wasn't just a name on a text or a smudge of lipstick. She was a petite woman with shiny brown hair, laughing at something he said, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they deliberated over a bunch of bananas. He was smiling that same, easy smile. They looked comfortable, normal, like a couple doing their weekly shopping. My body went rigid. The air was sucked from my lungs. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. I just stood there, frozen behind a display of avocados, watching my husband play house with the woman he'd chosen over me. This was the low point. This was the crater left by the bomb. It wasn't the rage or the tears. It was this absolute, soul-crushing invisibility. Our catastrophe was the most defining event of my life, and for him, it was already a transition. A segue into a new story, with a new co-star, in the fucking produce aisle of King Soopers. He looked up. His eyes scanned the store and then, they passed over me. For a fraction of a second, his gaze swept across my face and moved on, not registering, not seeing me at all. I was a ghost in my own life. Then, a microsecond later, his head snapped back. His eyes widened. He saw me. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of sheer panic. He said something to her and her head turned, her eyes curious, then politely uncomfortable. She dropped her hand from his arm. Daniel took a step toward me, but I was already moving. I abandoned my cart, turned on my heel, and walked. I didn't run. I walked with a stiff, mechanical precision out of the produce section, past the bakery, through the automatic doors, into the blinding, meaningless sunlight of the parking lot. I fumbled for my keys, my hand shaking so badly I dropped them. I left them on the asphalt. I got into my car, locked the doors, and finally, I screamed. It was a silent, breathless scream into the palms of my hands, my body convulsing with the force of it. He had moved on. Already. He was buying bananas with her. I drove home. The house was empty and silent. Noah was at an after-school club. I walked from room to room, the walls pressing in on me. The silence was no longer just empty, it was accusing. It whispered of failure, of replacement, of being so utterly forgettable that a man could erase 11 years in a matter of weeks. I ended up in the garage. The black trash bag and the pile of ruined boxes were still there, festering in the corner. The sight of them, my pathetic act of defiance, now seemed ridiculous and childish. What was the point? He was buying bananas. He didn't care about his ruined sweaters. The hiking gear caught my eye. The new boots, still stiff. The expensive waterproof jacket. The backpack. It was all bought for a future that had evaporated. A future of us, exploring trails together. A raw, reckless impulse took hold. I didn't think. I just acted. I shoved the boots on my feet. I grabbed the jacket and the backpack. I threw a half-empty bottle of water and a protein bar from the kitchen into the pack. I got back in the car. I drove west, out of the suburbs, into the foothills, toward the mountains that had always been our sanctuary, our place. It was stupid. It was late afternoon. I had no plan, but I had to get out. I had to go somewhere the walls weren't watching me with pity. I pulled into a trailhead I knew well, the one for Maxwell Falls. It was a moderate hike we'd done a dozen times. The parking lot was empty. The sun was already dipping behind the peaks, casting long, cold shadows. The air had a sharp bite. I started walking. I walked fast, with no warm-up, driven by a frantic energy to outpace the thoughts in my head. Not enough. Forgettable. Replaceable, the boots were stiff and rubbed my heels raw. I didn't care. The pain was an anchor. I pushed harder, climbing the steep switchbacks, my breath coming in ragged gasps that burned my lungs. Tears streamed down my face, hot and angry. I wasn't hiking. I was fleeing. I was trying to climb out of the hole I was in, but the hole was inside me. The light was fading quickly. I reached a lookout point, a flat rock that offered a view of the valley below. The city lights were starting to twinkle, a vast, indifferent grid. Our house was down there somewhere. His new hotel was down there. The grocery store was down there. The enormity of it all crashed down on me. The loneliness, the fear, the sheer exhausting effort it would take to rebuild from nothing. To become someone who wasn't defined by this betrayal. My legs gave out. I didn't sit. I collapsed onto the cold, hard rock, the granite scraping my palms. The sobs came then, wrenching, body-shaking sobs that echoed in the silent, darkening wilderness. I cried until I had no breath left, until I was hollowed out and empty, curled up on a rock at the top of a mountain, completely and utterly alone. The last of the light bled from the sky. The temperature plummeted. I was shivering, lost and unprepared. This was it. The bottom. I had driven myself to a literal and metaphorical cliff edge in the dark, with no light, no way forward, and no strength left to go back. The cold was what saved me. It wasn't the gentle chill of an autumn evening anymore. It was a sharp, penetrating cold that seeped through my jacket and bit into my skin. It was a physical demand my body couldn't ignore. The hysterical numbness of despair was a luxury the mountain wouldn't allow. I uncurled, my muscles stiff and protesting. The world was utterly black. The city lights in the valley were a distant, fuzzy galaxy. Up here, there was only the ink-black silhouette of pine trees against a slightly less black sky, and a vast, deafening silence broken only by the wind sighing through the needles. I was lost. Not just emotionally, but literally, physically lost on a dark mountainside. The drama of my breakdown suddenly seemed incredibly stupid and dangerous. Daniel wasn't up here. My pain wasn't up here. The only things up here were the cold, the dark, and my own poor choices. A raw, primal fear cut through the self-pity. This wasn't a metaphor anymore. If I didn't move, I could get hypothermia. If I stumbled on the trail in the dark, I could break an ankle. Noah would lose his mother because she'd thrown a tantrum on a rock. The thought was a bucket of ice water. Move, Scarlett, just move. I pushed myself up, my body trembling violently. I fumbled with my backpack, my fingers clumsy and numb, and retrieved my phone. 12% battery, no service. But the flashlight function worked. The beam was a tiny, pathetic spear of light in the overwhelming darkness, illuminating the dusty toes of my boots and a few feet of rocky path. It was something. I had to get down. The trail had seemed straightforward on the way up, but in the absolute dark, every rock looked the same, every turn ambiguous. I started walking, my steps hesitant, the beam of light jittering with my shaking hands. I focused on the tiny circle of illumination at my feet. Just that circle. Just the next step. Then, the next. The hike down was a different kind of agony. It was slow, terrifying, and intensely physical. Every rustle in the bushes made my heart leap into my throat. Every misstep on a loose stone sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. There was no room for thoughts of Daniel, of Jenna, of the divorce papers. My entire world had shrunk to the next safe place to put my foot, the next few feet of trail revealed by my dying phone light. It was the most present I had been in weeks. I fell once, scraping my palm raw on a tree root I didn't see. I sat there for a second on the cold ground, the pain sharp and clarifying. I wanted to give up, to just sit there and wait for someone to find me. But the image of Noah's face, worried and waiting, flashed in my mind. I got up. I kept going. An hour later, I saw it. A faint, beautiful glow through the trees. The parking lot light. I almost cried with relief, but I didn't have the energy. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other until I stumbled out of the tree line and onto the gravel. My car was the only one there, a lonely metal box under a lone sodium light buzzing with insects. I fell into the driver's seat, locking the doors immediately, as if I'd escaped some great danger. I was shivering uncontrollably, filthy, and my heel was bleeding into my sock. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My face was pale, streaked with dirt and dried tears, my eyes wide and shocked. But I was down. I had gotten myself down. The drive home was a blur. I walked into the silent, dark house. It was 10 p.m. Noah was asleep upstairs, none the wiser. I stood in the shower, letting the hot water scald my cold skin, watching the dirt and blood swirl down the drain. The adrenaline faded, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The next morning, I woke up sore. Every muscle ached. The scrape on my palm was an angry red line. But the gray fog in my mind had lifted, just a fraction. The experience on the mountain had been stupid, but it had been real. The cold, the fear, the pain, they were sensations that belonged entirely to me. They weren't echoes of his betrayal. They were mine. Later that day on my lunch break, I did something else. I opened my laptop and didn't look at work emails. Instead, I Googled hiking trails near Denver, easy to moderate. Then I clicked on the All Trails website. I created an account. Not under our shared email, under a new one. Just for me. I stared at the screen. A blank profile. A blank list of completed hikes. A blank list of to-dos. My finger hovered over the keyboard. Then, slowly, deliberately, I typed a name into the search bar. Not Maxwell Falls. Somewhere new. Somewhere with no history. Bear Creek Trail, it was called. Short, well-marked, rated easy. I didn't have a goal. I didn't have a plan to become some expert mountaineer. The thought was absurd. But the memory of that tiny circle of light on the trail, the singular focus on the next step, was a feeling I craved. It was the only thing that had quieted the noise in my head. That Saturday, I told Noah I was going for a drive. I didn't explain, I just went. I drove to the Bear Creek trailhead. I put on my stiff boots, shouldered my backpack with 2 full water bottles and actual snacks this time, and I started walking. It was different. The sun was out. Birds were chirping. Other people were on the trail, nodding hello as they passed. I walked slowly. I didn't try to outrun anything. I just walked. I noticed the way the light filtered through the yellowing aspen leaves. I stopped to watch a squirrel scramble up a pine tree. I felt the burn in my calves, not as a punishment, but as a feeling. A proof of life. I reached the end of the trail, a small overlook with a view of a meadow. It wasn't dramatic or breathtaking. It was just nice, quiet. I sat on a rock, drank my water, and ate my apple. On the way back to the car, I took out my phone. I opened the All Trails app. I pressed the button that said Record Hike. I let it track me all the way back to the parking lot. When I finished, a notification popped up. Congratulations on completing Bear Creek Trail. Save this hike to your log? I pressed yes. It was a tiny thing. A digital checkmark on a stupid app. But as I got in my car and looked at that little saved log entry on my screen, something shifted inside me. It was a data point. Evidence. It was no longer a story about what he had done or what I had lost. It was a simple, undeniable fact. Scarlett Wilson, marketing manager, divorcee, mother, and today she hiked 3 miles. It was the first step. Not up a mountain, but back to myself. The world didn't magically right itself. The divorce papers still sat on the counter. Daniel's nightly calls still made Noah quiet and withdrawn. The grocery store was still a potential minefield. But something had fundamentally changed. It wasn't the world, it was my point of focus. The tiny circle of light from my phone flashlight on that dark mountain trail became a metaphor I clung to. I couldn't illuminate the whole path of my ruined life. I couldn't see the end, but I could see the next step, and then the one after that. Hiking stopped being a one-off act of desperation and became my non-negotiable. My appointment with myself. Every Saturday morning, rain or shine, I went. I didn't ask Noah if he wanted to come. I think he needed the consistency of my absence as much as I needed the solitude. He'd just nod when I said I was going, already absorbed in his game. I started with the easy trails. Bear Creek, Meyer Ranch, Lair of the Bear. I downloaded maps. I bought a better water bottle. I broke in the boots until they molded to my feet, the blisters hardening into calluses. The physicality of it was a relief. The ache in my muscles was a clean, honest pain. It was something I had chosen, something I had earned, unlike the psychic pain Daniel had inflicted. One Saturday, it was pouring rain. A cold, relentless November drizzle that turned the trails to mud. I looked out the window, my coffee warm in my hands. The old me, the one who curated a perfect life, would have sighed and declared it a couch day. The new me, the one with calluses, just zipped up her rain jacket and went. The forest in the rain was a different world. It smelled of wet earth and pine. The only sounds were the drip-drip from the branches and the squelch of my boots in the mud. There was no one else out. I was alone, but for the first time, alone didn't feel lonely. It felt powerful. I was the only person crazy or dedicated enough to be out here. I was proving something to myself, and the miserable weather was just a better audience. I slipped on a muddy incline, landing hard on my backside. For a second, I just sat there in the cold mud, rain pelting my face. And then I laughed. A real, unexpected burst of laughter that echoed in the silent, wet woods. It was ridiculous. This was ridiculous. And it was wonderful. I wasn't a tragic heroine. I was a muddy, middle-aged woman having a stupidly authentic moment in the rain. I got up, wiped the mud off my pants as best I could, and kept going. The ritual extended beyond the trail. Coming home, peeling off the wet layers, the hot shower that felt like a reward. I'd make a big breakfast, and Noah would wander down, drawn by the smell of bacon. He'd look at my wet hair piled on my head, my flushed face, and sometimes, just sometimes, the guarded look in his eyes would soften. "How was the hike?" he'd ask, grabbing a piece of toast. "Wet," I'd say. I fell in the mud. A tiny, almost smile would touch his lips. "Nice, Mom." They were small moments. Fractured pieces of our new normal. But they were ours. They weren't built on the foundation of the old life, they were new bricks, slowly being laid on a new, sturdier base. I began to notice my body changing. Not just the weight loss or the new muscle definition in my legs, but the way it felt. My lungs could draw deeper breaths. My heart didn't race on the steep inclines anymore. I could power up a hill, my breath steady, my mind clear. The rhythm of my steps, step, breath, step, became a moving meditation. The problems that seemed insurmountable in my silent house, the legal fees, the custody discussion, the sheer logistics of being a single parent, would unravel themselves somewhere between mile 2 and 3. I wasn't finding solutions up there, but I was finding the capacity to face them. The AllTrails app became my personal trophy case. Each completed hike was a small victory. I started venturing further, trying moderate-rated trails. The air got thinner, the views more expansive. I didn't hike to escape my life anymore. I hiked to inhabit myself more fully, to remember that I was a physical being who could climb a mountain, not just an emotional wreck who'd been knocked down by one. One afternoon, I was in an outdoor gear shop buying a pair of better hiking socks. I was looking at a display of topographic maps, tracing a route with my finger, when a voice spoke beside me. "That's a good one, but the switchbacks on the backside are a beast this time of year." "I see." I turned. A man, maybe a few years older than me, was smiling. He had kind eyes crinkled at the corners and the weathered look of someone who spent a lot of time outside. He wasn't hitting on me, he was just offering friendly hiker advice. "Oh," I said, slightly flustered. It was the first non-transactional conversation I'd had with a man in months. "Thanks for the tip. I'll stick to the front way." "Smart move," he said with a nod and moved on to look at water filters. I stood there for a second, holding the socks. My heart was beating a little fast, but it wasn't from anxiety. It was from normalcy. A brief, casual, normal interaction. I hadn't flinched. I hadn't seen every man as a potential threat or a reminder of Daniel. I'd just seen a fellow hiker. I paid for my socks and walked out to my car. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue. The mountains in the distance were stark and beautiful against the horizon. I looked at them not as a challenge or an escape, but as a promise. There were still so many trails to explore. The routine had saved me, not by fixing anything, but by giving me a self that existed outside of the wreckage. Scarlett, the betrayed wife, was still there. Scarlett, the anxious single mother, was still there. But now there was also Scarlett, the hiker, the one with muddy boots and a steady breath. The one who could get herself down a mountain in the dark. She was the one I was counting on to build whatever came next. The dream started the same way it always did. I was in the grocery store, frozen, watching them laugh by the bananas. But this time, when Daniel's eyes passed over me, I didn't feel the crushing weight of invisibility. This time, I turned my cart and walked away, not in panic, but with a shrug. I went to the cereal aisle and bought the kind with the marshmallows that Noah loved and Daniel had always deemed sugar poison. It was a small, silly act of defiance within the dream. When I woke up, the familiar ache was there, but it was fainter, a ghost pain from a healed wound. It was this shift, this almost imperceptible change in the fabric of my subconscious, that made me do it. I opened my AllTrails app and looked at the list I privately labeled Someday. At the top was Quandary Peak. A 14er, over 14 feet. It wasn't the hardest, but it was a serious mountain. The kind of hike Daniel and I had always talked about doing one day and never did. Someday felt like today. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, who were still cautiously checking in on me. Certainly not Daniel. And not Noah. If I failed, I wanted it to be a private failure. This wasn't for an audience. I prepared meticulously. I studied the route, the weather forecast, the necessary gear. I packed my backpack the night before with more water and food than I thought I could possibly need. I went to bed early, but sleep was elusive. This wasn't like my previous hikes. This was a test. I left the house at 4 a.m., the Colorado air bitingly cold. The drive to the trailhead was quiet, my headlights cutting a solitary path through the darkness. When I arrived, there were already a few other cars. Serious-looking trucks with roof racks for skis and bikes. I felt a flicker of imposter syndrome. Who was I, Scarlett the betrayed marketing manager, to think I could do this? I shoved the doubt down, laced my boots tight, and started walking as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky. The beginning of the trail was a gentle incline through a pine forest. It was peaceful, familiar. I found my rhythm easily, my breath pluming in the cold air. But then the trees began to thin, and the real climb began. The trail turned into a steep, relentless incline of switchbacks carved into the mountainside. The air grew thinner. My lungs began to burn, each breath feeling like it pulled in less oxygen. My legs, which had felt so strong on my weekly hikes, screamed in protest. This was different. This was hard in a way I hadn't anticipated. The self-doubt came rushing back, a toxic whisper in time with my labored breathing. You can't do this. You're not strong enough. You're going to have to turn back. Just like you turned back from your marriage. I stopped, leaning heavily on my trekking poles, my head bowed. Other hikers passed me, giving me encouraging nods. "You've got this," one woman called out, her breathing steady and strong. I wanted to believe her. I looked up. The summit looked impossibly far away, a jagged tooth against a brilliant blue sky. The path to it was a treacherous-looking scree slope. It seemed insane, reckless. But then I thought of the dream, of turning the cart away. I thought of the boxes in the rain, the cold rock I'd cried on, the muddy trail I'd laughed on. Every step of the last few months had been leading here, to this moment of choice on a mountainside. I wasn't doing this to prove anything to Daniel. I was doing this to prove it to myself. To prove that the woman who got herself down the mountain in the dark could also get herself to the top of one in the light. I started moving again. My pace was slower now, a painstaking plod. Step, breathe, step, breathe. I didn't look at the summit anymore. I did what I'd done that first night. I focused on the next 3 feet of trail. Just those 3 feet. The world shrunk to the crunch of my boots on the gravel, the rasp of my breath, and the metronome of my heart. There was no past, no future, no divorce, no custody schedule, no lonely bed. There was only the mountain, and my body moving up it, inch by agonizing inch. The final stretch was the worst. The scree was loose, sliding away under my feet with every step. The air was so thin, I felt lightheaded. My trekking pole snapped on a rock, sending me stumbling to my knees. For a terrifying second, I thought I was going to slide back down. I dug my hands into the cold gravel, my fingers going numb, and pushed myself back up. I left the broken pole behind. And then, suddenly, the ground leveled out. There was no more up. I straightened my aching back and looked around. I was on the summit. The view stole the breath I'd just fought so hard to regain. A 360-degree panorama of the world. Endless ranges of jagged peaks, snow-capped and majestic, stretched out in every direction like a frozen ocean. The sky was a dome of impossible blue. I could see for 100 miles. I was on top of Colorado. On top of the world. A sound escaped me, a half-sob, half-laugh of pure, unadulterated triumph. I was alone up there. The other hikers who had passed me were already beginning their descent. For this one perfect moment, the summit was mine. I found a rock out of the wind and sat, pulling out my water and a peanut butter sandwich. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness, from awe, from the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of what I had done. I had carried myself here. My own 2 legs, my own stubborn will. I didn't think about Daniel. I didn't think about the life I'd lost. Sitting on that rock, eating my stupid sandwich, I felt a sense of wholeness I hadn't felt in over a year. The missing piece hadn't been him. It had been this version of me, the one who could set a seemingly impossible goal and, through sheer grit and grace, achieve it. The wind whipped at my hair, cold and clean. I looked out at the endless sea of mountains and felt not small, but connected. A part of something vast and beautiful and enduring. My problems, my heartbreak, my fears, they were still down there, in the valley. But from up here, they looked manageably small. I had spent so long looking down, at the mud, at the wreckage. Now, I was looking out. And the view was breathtaking. I took a picture, not a selfie, just the view. A record of the perspective. Then I packed my things. The descent was ahead and I knew it would be hard on my knees. But I wasn't afraid of it. Getting down was just another problem to solve, another path to walk. As I started my careful way down the scree slope, a new thought settled into my bones, as solid and undeniable as the mountain beneath my feet. I didn't need to be saved. I didn't need to be completed by anyone else. I was already enough. The high from Quandary Peak lasted for days. It was a quiet, steady hum under my skin, a new core of confidence that didn't erase the pain but put it in a different, more manageable perspective. I'd climbed a mountain. I could handle a contentious email from Daniel's lawyer about the sofa. My Saturdays went back to my regular, less epic hikes. But something had shifted. I was no longer just hiking to heal. I was hiking to explore, to see what was around the next bend. I started venturing to new trailheads, ones further from home, listed as moderately trafficked in the hopes of finding more solitude. That's how I ended up at the trailhead for Mohawk Lakes, a stunning but challenging series of alpine lakes near Breckenridge. The parking lot was fuller than I'd anticipated, with a small cluster of people gathered around a man holding a clipboard. A guided hike. I gave them a wide berth, preferring my own company, and set off at my own pace. The trail was beautiful, winding through dense aspens and alongside a rushing creek. I lost myself in the rhythm of it, my mind blissfully quiet. About 2 miles in, the trail began to climb more steeply, turning into a series of rocky steps that required careful footing. I was focused on my feet, my trekking poles clicking against the stone, when I heard it. A sharp, pained gasp, followed by a low sob. I looked up. A few switchbacks ahead of me, a woman from the guided group was sitting on a rock, her face contorted in pain. Her ankle was visibly swollen already, turned at an unnatural angle. The guide was kneeling in front of her, his back to me, his voice a low, calm murmur I couldn't quite hear. The rest of the group stood around, looking anxious and unsure. As I approached, I heard the guide speaking into a radio. Copy that. Yeah, we're about 2.5 miles in on the Mohawk Trail. Possible ankle fracture. We're gonna need a litter. He released the button and sighed, running a hand through his hair. He turned to address the group, and I got my first proper look at him. He was probably in his early 40s, with the lean, weathered look of someone who lived outdoors. His eyes were a calm, steady blue, and right now, they were filled with professional concern. All right, folks, he said, his voice even and reassuring. Help is on its way, but it's going to be a while. We need to keep her warm and still. I'm going to need a couple of you to stay with me. The rest of you can continue on to the lakes with the itinerary, or you can head back down to the trailhead, the group murmured nervously. It was a long way back down, and the idea of leaving their injured companion felt wrong. I didn't really think. I just stepped forward. I can stay, I heard myself say. The guide's eyes flicked to me, and for a brief second, I saw a flicker of surprise that I wasn't part of his group. Then, gratitude. Thank you. I'd appreciate the extra hands. Most of the group decided to head back down, a somber mood having fallen over them. Soon, it was just me, the guide, the injured woman Sarah, and one other man who looked like he might pass out. I'm Ben, by the way, the guide said, pulling an emergency blanket from his pack and gently wrapping it around Sarah's shoulders. His movements were efficient, practiced. And thank you again. This isn't how we usually like to spend our Saturdays. Scarlett, I said. And it's no problem. What followed was an hour of waiting. Ben stayed with Sarah, talking to her in that same low, calm voice, keeping her distracted with stories of the mountains, of other rescues he'd been part of that had happy endings. He was incredibly patient, never letting a flicker of stress show on his face, even though I could see it in the tightness of his shoulders. My job was mostly to rummage in his giant pack for whatever he needed. A compression bandage, more water, a protein bar for Sarah. The pack was a marvel of organization, everything in its place, prepared for every contingency. It was the antithesis of my own frantic, thrown-together preparedness on that first night hike. At one point, the other guy who stayed did indeed look like he was about to be sick from the stress. Ben glanced at him and then at me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave a slight nod and went over to the man. Hey, I said, my voice softer than I'd used in a while. Why don't you take a walk down the trail just a bit, get some air? We've got this here. He looked pathetically grateful and stumbled away. Ben caught my eye and offered a small, appreciative smile. It wasn't a flirtatious smile. It was a smile of shared purpose, of two people dealing with a difficult situation with a quiet competence. It felt good. Finally, we heard the shouts of the rescue team making their way up the trail. They took over with professional efficiency, strapping Sarah into a litter and beginning the slow, careful process of carrying her down. Ben and I stood together, watching them go. The adrenaline of the situation began to fade, leaving a strange, shared quiet in its place. "Well," he said, slinging his now lighter pack onto his back, "that was not on the brochure. Thank you, Scarlett. You were a rock star in there." "I didn't do much," I said, suddenly feeling shy. "Just fetched things." "You were calm," he said, and the way he said it felt like a significant compliment. That's the most important thing in a situation like that. Panic is contagious. So is calm. We started walking back down the trail together. The pace was slow, unhurried. We talked about hiking, about the best trails in the area, about the weird things you find on trails. He'd once found a full set of false teeth. The conversation was easy, natural. He was a graphic designer who led guided hikes on the weekends for fun, to share his love of the mountains. He spoke about the peaks not as conquests, but as old friends. It was the first real, extended conversation I'd had with a man since Daniel that wasn't layered with pain, history, or legal strategy. There was no subtext. No agenda. Just two people who loved the mountains, walking and talking. He didn't ask about my personal life. I didn't offer. We existed in a perfect, present tense bubble on that descending trail. When we reached the trailhead, the rescue truck was already gone. The parking lot was almost empty. "Well," he said, shifting his pack again, "I owe you a coffee for your trouble. Or a beer, but I've got to file an incident report that's probably longer than my college thesis." "It was an interesting hike," I said, smiling. "Good luck with the report." I turned to go to my car. "Scarlett," he called out. I turned back. He was holding a business card. It was simple, just his name, Ben Carter, graphic design and illustration, and his number. On the back, he'd scribbled something. "It's my hiking side business," he said. I lead a small group hike every Sunday. Less chance of broken ankles. Usually. If you're ever looking for people to hike with," he said it casually, but there was a genuine warmth in his eyes. An invitation, not a demand. I took the card. My fingers didn't tremble. "Thanks, Ben, maybe I will." I got in my car and watched him walk to his. A dusty Subaru with a roof rack, exactly what I would have guessed. I looked down at the card in my hand. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was an offer of shared trail, of company, of calm. I didn't program his number into my phone. I just put the card in my glove compartment, next to the trail maps and a packet of napkins. It was a possibility, a tiny potential turn in the path ahead. And for the first time, the idea of a turn, of a new path, didn't feel like a betrayal of my old life. It just felt like a hike I hadn't taken yet. The business card lived in my glove compartment for a week. Every time I got in the car, I saw it tucked next to the owner's manual. It became a quiet, persistent question mark in my life. Maybe I will. The following Sunday morning, I found myself staring into my closet, not at my work clothes or my jeans, but at my hiking gear. My hand hovered over my usual familiar outfit. Then, impulsively, I reached for a newer, dark green shirt I'd bought on a whim and never worn. It was a small thing. A stupid thing. But it felt significant. I didn't overthink it. I grabbed my pack, my boots, and Ben's card, and I drove to the meeting point he'd scribbled on the back, the Mayflower Gulch trailhead. There were about 8 people already there, a mix of ages and fitness levels, all buzzing with a friendly, weekend energy. Ben was at the center, checking names off on his clipboard. He looked up as I approached, and a genuine smile of recognition broke across his face. It wasn't overly familiar, just warmly professional. "Scarlett, you made it. Glad to have you." He handed me a waiver form on a clipboard. "Standard procedure. Promise no one's going to break an ankle today." "I'll do my best," I said, smiling back, the nerves settling. The hike was beautiful, the trail winding through an old mining area with picturesque ruins and into a breathtaking alpine basin. Ben was a great guide, pointing out geological features, historical tidbits, and the names of wildflowers. He was attentive to the group, always making sure the slowest hiker was okay, but his eyes would occasionally find mine, sharing a silent joke about someone's overly expensive brand new gear or the sheer beauty of the place. It was easy, fun. On the way back, the group had spread out, people walking at their own pace. I found myself walking beside Ben near the front. "So, graphic designer by week, mountain guide by weekend?" I asked. "Something like that," he laughed. "It keeps me from getting stuck behind a screen all the time, and I get to share this." He gestured to the vast, sun-drenched valley around us. "Can't beat the office view." We walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "You're a natural out here," he said after a while. "You have a good pace." "Steady. Lots of practice lately," I said, and it was the first time I'd acknowledged my past without it feeling like a confession of damage. He just nodded, as if he understood that practice could mean 1,000 different things. He didn't pry. When we got to a fork in the trail, he stopped the group. "All right, folks, we've got 2 options back to the cars. The way we came, which is beautiful, or there's a slightly longer loop that takes us along a ridge with even better views. It's a bit trickier to follow. The trail markers are faint. Who's up for an adventure?" Most of the group, tired but happy, opted for the known route. A few of us, myself included, opted for the ridge. Ben pulled a well-worn topographic map from his pocket. It was clearly ancient, the folds so deep they were nearly tears. He unfolded it with a practiced flourish, but one corner ripped slightly. He winced. "This thing has seen better days," he muttered, trying to refold it to the right section. The wind caught it, fluttering the paper wildly. He fought with it for a second, the map twisting into an impossible origami nightmare. He looked so comically frustrated, this supremely competent outdoorsman being bested by a piece of paper. I couldn't help it. I laughed. He looked up, a mock-offended expression on his face that quickly broke into a self-deprecating grin. "Oh, you think this is funny? You try and read this thing in a wind tunnel." "May I?" I asked, still smiling. He handed the fluttering mess over. I'd spent my career reading complex data charts and market maps. A topographic map, with its lines and scales, wasn't that different. I smoothed it out against my thigh, orienting it with the mountain ahead of us, my fingers tracing the ridgeline we wanted. "Okay," I said, holding down the edges. "We're here. The ridge trail should branch off just past that copse of bristlecone pine, see? It follows this contour line." I pointed from the map to the actual landscape. Ben leaned in, his shoulder close to mine, to look where I was pointing. He smelled like sunscreen and fresh air. "Well, look at that," he said, his voice impressed. A woman who can read a poorly folded map. A rare and valuable skill. Our eyes met for a second. The laughter was still there, but underneath it was something else. A spark of genuine connection. It wasn't about the map. It was about the shared moment, the silliness, the mutual competence. The rest of the small group caught up, and we set off, with me nominally navigating with the rebellious map. We took a wrong turn once, ending up in a field of loose scree that had us all sliding comically for a few feet before we backtracked, laughing and groaning. It wasn't a disaster, it was an adventure. Ben didn't get flustered. He just joked that it was now the extended scenic tour. When we finally made it to the promised ridge, the view was indeed spectacular, made sweeter by the minor misadventure it took to get there. We all stood there, catching our breath, taking in the panorama. Ben came to stand beside me. "Thanks for the navigation assist. I might have to hire you as my permanent map reader. I'll consider it," I said, teasing. "My rates are high." He smiled, and it reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "I bet they are." The walk back to the cars was filled with easy conversation and the satisfied fatigue of a good day outdoors. As people began to disperse, heading to their vehicles with waves and, "Thanks, Ben," he turned to me. "There's a pretty good brewery just down the road. Their patio is dog-friendly, if you're into that sort of thing. And if you're not ready for the day to be over," he said it casually, but there was a hopeful note underneath. A year ago, even a month ago, I would have made an excuse. I would have retreated to the safety of my own silence. But the woman on the mountain, the one who had navigated the poorly folded map and laughed in the scree field, she was curious. "A beer sounds perfect, actually," I heard myself say. We sat on the sun-drenched patio of the brewery, a golden retriever snoozing at the feet of the people at the next table. We talked for hours. Not about our pasts, not really. We talked about our favorite books. He loved historical nonfiction, I was a thriller addict, our favorite terrible movies. We both had a secret love for 80s action films, and our mutual disdain for kale. He told me stories about growing up in Colorado, about getting lost in the wilderness as a teenager and it sparking a lifelong respect for the mountains instead of a fear of them. I learned that his patience wasn't a performance, it was his default setting. He listened, truly listened, when I talked about Noah, about my work. He didn't look at me as a problem to be solved or a wounded bird to be fixed. He just looked at me like I was interesting. It was the most normal, uncomplicatedly pleasant afternoon I'd had in over a year. For the first time, I wasn't someone's ex-wife. I wasn't a victim of a scandal. I was just Scarlett, having a beer with a nice, interesting man after a hike. When we finally said goodbye in the parking lot, the sun was dipping behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "I had a really great time today, Scarlett," he said, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Me too, Ben. Thanks for the hike. And the beer. I've got a hike planned next weekend to Blue Lakes. It's a good one. Maybe I'll see you there?" It was an invitation, but it was also an out. "No pressure. Maybe you will," I said. I drove home with the windows down, the cool evening air washing over me. I didn't feel the giddy, nervous high of a new crush. I felt a deep, steady sense of peace. The world felt a little wider, a little brighter. The future, for the first time, didn't look like a lonely road. It looked like a trailhead, with many possible paths leading out from it. And one of them, just maybe, included a man who was patient, calm, and really bad at folding maps. The first snow fell softly on a Saturday in late December, dusting the mountains around my little rental cottage in a layer of pristine white. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the rich, savory scent of roasting chicken and the earthy aroma of pine from the Christmas tree standing proudly in the corner. Noah was on the floor, attempting to untangle a hopeless knot of Christmas lights, his brow furrowed in concentration that was so like his father's, it sometimes made my heart ache. But the ache was different now, distant, more memory than wound. "It's a lost cause, buddy," I said, smiling from my place at the kitchen island where I was peeling potatoes. "I can do it," he muttered, his teenage stubbornness kicking in. A knock at the door, 3 firm, familiar raps. Noah's head shot up, the knot forgotten, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Ben's here." I wiped my hands on a towel, my own smile mirroring his. I opened the door to a blast of cold air, and Ben, his cheeks ruddy from the cold, a dusting of snow in his dark hair, and a large, flat, carefully wrapped rectangle under his arm. "Sorry I'm late," he said, stomping his boots on the welcome mat before stepping inside. The line at the frame shop was a mile long. He leaned in and gave me a quick, warm kiss that still sent a pleasant little shock through my system. It was a kiss that spoke of easy familiarity, of shared jokes and quiet understandings built over months of hikes, dinners, and lazy Sunday afternoons. "What's that?" Noah asked, immediately abandoning the lights and coming over to investigate. "A little something for your mom," Ben said, his eyes twinkling as he handed me the package. "A housewarming present." For the new place. We'd moved in 2 weeks ago. The mountain cabin had been a joint decision. It was smaller than our old house, and my commute was longer, but every window framed a postcard view of the peaks I'd come to love. It felt like us. It felt like a fresh start written in wood and stone. I carefully tore open the paper. Inside was a beautifully framed, large-scale topographic map. But it wasn't just any map. It was a custom illustration, done in Ben's own artistic hand, a whimsical, beautifully detailed map of the area around our new home. Our cottage was marked with a tiny, illustrated red roof. There were tiny trees, wandering trails, and even a small laughing-stick figure of a woman with red hair standing on a peak labeled Quandary. But what made my breath catch were the 3 names inscribed in elegant script along a drawn path that wound from the cottage into the mountains: Scarlett, Noah, and Ben's excellent adventures. "Ben, this is..." I couldn't finish. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were the good kind. The kind that meant something was so right it overflowed. "I figured we needed a properly drawn map for this place," he said softly, squeezing my hand. "One that doesn't try to fight you." Noah peered at it, his face alight with interest. "Whoa, that's so cool. Is that us? Are we going to hike all of these?" He pointed to the trails Ben had illustrated. "That's the plan, partner," Ben said, clapping a hand on Noah's shoulder. "But first, I believe I was promised a legendary Scarlett Wilson roast chicken." "Hello." I brought the gravy. My grandmother's recipe. It's a serious matter. Dinner was a loud, messy, joyful affair. Ben told a story about a moose that had chased him up a tree on a guided hike, and Noah laughed so hard he almost snorted milk out of his nose. I watched them, my two boys. One gangly and growing, one steady and kind, and felt a sense of wholeness settle so deeply into my bones it felt like it had always been there. This wasn't the family I'd planned on. It was better. It was chosen. It was built not on the shaky foundation of assumed forever, but on the solid rock of shared values, mutual respect, and a whole lot of intentionally terrible 80s movie quotes. After dinner, while Noah cleared the table with a surprising amount of diligence, Ben's influence, not mine, Ben helped me with the dishes. Our hips bumped comfortably in the small kitchen. "He's a good kid, Scarlett," Ben said quietly, nodding toward Noah, who was now trying to balance 3 plates at once. "He is," I said, my heart swelling. "He really likes you. The feeling is mutual." Later, we all piled onto the couch under a thick blanket, a bowl of popcorn between us, and put on the promised terrible 80s action movie. About 20 minutes in, I felt a weight on my shoulder. I looked over. Noah had fallen asleep, his head resting against me, his breathing deep and even. On my other side, Ben's arm was around my shoulders, his thumb gently stroking my arm. I sat there in the warm, dim light of the television, the sounds of cheesy explosions and one-liners filling the room, surrounded by the two people I loved most in the world. I looked past Noah's sleeping head to the window. Outside, the snow was still falling, blanketing the world in a soft, quiet peace. The journey here had been brutal. There had been times in the cold, in the rain, in the absolute dark, when I believed I would never feel warm or safe or whole again. I had to get lost on a mountain to find my way. I had to fall apart to learn how to put myself back together piece by piece into someone stronger, someone truer. I wasn't just Scarlett, the betrayed wife. Or Scarlett, the marketing manager. Or even just Scarlett, the hiker. I was Scarlett, the mother, the partner, the map reader, the builder of a new, beautiful, and unexpected family. Ben leaned over and pressed a kiss into my hair. "You okay?" he whispered, so as not to wake Noah. I looked at my son's peaceful face, felt the solid, steady presence of the good man beside me, and took in the 4 walls of the home we were making together. I smiled, snuggling deeper into the blanket, into my life. "I'm perfect," I said. And for the first time, I knew it was true.